All right, if you still don't fully grasp the scale of what just happened, take a step back for a moment. Don't look at this as a series of isolated strikes. Look at it as a shift in the system itself. Because when you see Qatar being hit, when you see sustained pressure on Tel Aviv, this isn't escalation in the traditional sense. This isn't tit for tat. This is the activation of something much larger. And this is exactly what Professor Jiang warned about when he described the big event. Not a single moment, not a near decisive battle, but a cascading sequence, a chain reaction that slowly begins to unravel the existing global order. Now think about what Qatar represents. It's not just another country in the Gulf, it's a central node in the global energy network. A significant portion of the world's liquefied natural gas flows through its infrastructure. So when Qatar is hit, you're not just damaging a country, you're sending shockwaves through supply chains, energy markets, entire economies that depend on stability. That's what makes this moment different. The targets aren't symbolic, they're systemic. And here's something you should pause on. No one accidentally selects systemic targets. That requires intent, clarity, planning on a level most people underestimate. At the same time, Tel Aviv being struck isn't just military, it's psychological. It represents density, capital, technology, one of the most critical urban centers in the region. Sustained pressure on a city like that tells you something very specific. This is no longer about signaling. This is about degradation. But here's the part most analysts are missing. Degradation of what exactly? Because if you look closely, the pattern isn't random destruction. It's selective, precise, almost surgical. And that precision is what should concern you. Now, through a conventional geopolitical lens, you might assume both sides are miscalculating, that escalation is spiraling, that eventually there will be pressure to de-escalate. But that assumption rests on one critical belief, that the actors involved actually want de-escalation, and that belief may no longer hold. What if de-escalation was never the objective? What if the entire framework we use to interpret conflict, the idea that rational actors seek stability, is itself flawed? Because within every society there are factions that don't see conflict as a crisis to contain, but as an opportunity to exploit. And this is where Professor Jiang's framework becomes essential. You cannot understand external conflict without understanding internal conflict. Nations are not single actors. They are arenas filled with competing groups, competing incentives, competing visions of the future. So every time you hear a unified statement from a government, remember, behind that message are rooms full of people who don't agree, which means when you see strikes on Qatar, when you see pressure on Tel Aviv, the real question isn't just why is this happening, it's who benefits if it continues. Because for some groups, escalation isn't a failure of strategy. It is the strategy. And the most dangerous players are rarely the loudest ones. They're the quiet ones, the ones watching from a distance while everything else burns. Now, from a tactical perspective, a few things stand out immediately. The precision, the coordination, the timing. This isn't random. It suggests intelligence capabilities that go far beyond basic surveillance, the ability to identify high-value targets, predict movement, exploit vulnerabilities in real time. Which raises a fundamental question: how is this level of targeting even possible? Because the answer changes everything. At this level, there are generally two methods: signals intelligence, intercepting communications, tracking digital footprints, and human intelligence, people on the ground providing direct, actionable insight. Publicly, states emphasize technology, but historically, the most decisive intelligence has always come from human sources. Always. And that leads to an uncomfortable implication. If this level of precision is being achieved, then someone on the inside is providing it. Which brings us back to internal conflict, the idea that the most important battles aren't happening between nations, but within them. Think about that. The most consequential war right now might not even be visible on a map. Imagine two competing organizations. From the outside, it looks like a simple rivalry, but internally, both are divided. Factions competing for control, influence, future direction. Now imagine one faction gains advantage by weakening its own side, even indirectly cooperating with the external opponent. Not out of loyalty, but because they're playing a different game. And that's the disturbing part. The enemy isn't always outside the walls. Sometimes they hold the keys to the gate. This is what Professor Jiang calls layered competition. You're never playing one game, you're playing several. simultaneously. And the game that drives your decisions is the one closest to your survival, your power, your position. He calls it the law of proximity. And once you understand that, you stop seeing geopolitics the same way, because now the picture becomes more complex. Yes, there's external conflict, but internal struggles are shaping how that conflict unfolds. Sometimes escalation externally stabilizes power internally. It consolidates control, silences opposition, justifies extreme measures. And here's the most unsettling thought. Some decision makers pushing this escalation forward may not even expect to win the external war. They're focused on winning the internal one, which is why the idea of a quick resolution doesn't hold, because for some, prolonging the conflict is beneficial. It reshapes power in ways peace never could. History has seen this before. The difference now is scale and the tools, including the ability to shape what billions of people believe in real time. Now consider the trajectory. When energy infrastructure becomes a target, when major cities face sustained pressure, you're moving toward maximalist objectives, not limited outcomes, but fundamental change to the opposing system. Not just military capability, but economic strength, social cohesion, psychological resilience. And when both sides think this way, escalation becomes self-reinforcing, and self-reinforcing systems don't stop easily. They don't stop because someone calls for peace. They stop only when the cost of continuing becomes greater than the cost of stopping, and right now, that threshold hasn't been reached. Because every action justifies the next. What was once unthinkable, it becomes normal. What becomes normal becomes expected, and what's expected becomes the baseline. This isn't theory. It's a pattern repeated in every major modern conflict. And then there's the information layer. Conflicting reports, delays, gaps. That's not accidental. Information itself is now a battlefield. Controlling perception, shaping narratives, influencing belief. Sometimes that matters more than what actually happens on the ground. Because an event unseen might as well not exist. But a narrative believed by millions can reshape reality, which means right now, as you watch all of this unfold, someone, somewhere, is deciding what version of reality you get to see, and they're very good at it. So what does all of this mean? Where is this heading? This isn't just a conflict between states. It's a clash between different models of order. One built on global interconnected systems, energy, capital, information. The other driven by sovereignty, identity, control, often rooted in deeper ideological frameworks. This clash isn't new, but its intensity and its proximity to critical infrastructure is. And when these systems collide, the result isn't negotiation, it's restructuring, a phase where the old system weakens and a new one hasn't yet formed. And here's the question no one wants to ask. What if there is no new equilibrium? What if instability itself becomes the new normal? Because what Professor Jiang warned about was never a single event. It was a sequence, a series of interconnected developments pushing the system toward a tipping point, and where diplomacy, economic ties, and institutions begin to fail. And once that happens, the range of outcomes expands dramatically, not just toward bad outcomes, but unimaginable ones. Does that mean the worst is inevitable? Not necessarily, but it does mean the margin for error is shrinking. And the decisions being made right now matter more than ever. Because the window to change the trajectory is not unlimited. And maybe the most important thing to understand is this. What you're watching isn't just about one region. It's part of a larger pattern, a shift in how conflict works, how power is used, how systems respond under pressure. And once you see that pattern, you start seeing it everywhere. So when you hear about strikes, when you see images from conflict zones, don't see isolated events, see signals, because the big event doesn't arrive with a single moment. It emerges gradually, through changes that seem manageable on their own, but together reshape everything. And by the time most people recognize it, the most important moves have already been made. The truth is, we may not be at the beginning of this. We may already be deep inside it. And the real question is no longer if the world changes, it's how much of the old world survives.